Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
I was living with my dad at the time, in a house that sat on about 2 acres of land. It was not completely isolated, but it felt that way at night. Woods surrounded most of the property, and once the sun went down, there was very little light beyond the house. From my bedroom window, all I could see were trees, darkness, and the faint outline of the yard. During the day, the place seemed normal. It was quiet, peaceful, and far enough away from busy roads that we did not hear much traffic. At night, however, the silence felt different. Every sound seemed louder. Branches scraped against one another in the wind. Small animals moved through the leaves. The house made the usual creaking noises that older houses make when the temperature changes. None of that bothered me. I had lived there long enough to know the normal sounds of the property. I knew what raccoons sounded like near the trash cans. I knew how the trees sounded when the wind picked up. I knew which floorboards creaked and which doors did not close properly. That was why the first incident disturbed me so much. It happened one night at around 11. I was in my bedroom playing video games, as I often did before going to sleep. Nothing unusual had happened that day. My dad and stepmom were somewhere else in the house, and everything was quiet. After playing for a while, I became tired and decided to go to bed. I shut the game off, put everything away, and turned out the lights. My room became completely dark, except for a small amount of light coming through the window. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers over myself, and closed my eyes. I could not have had them closed for more than 2 seconds when I heard a voice beside me. "Don't worry, we're here." It was a girl's voice. The words were whispered directly into my ear. I did not hear them from across the room or through the wall. The voice was so close that I felt breath touch the side of my face. For one terrible moment, I genuinely believed someone was leaning over the bed. My eyes opened immediately. I turned toward the voice, expecting to see a person standing there, but there was nobody beside me. The room was empty. I sat up and turned on the lamp as quickly as I could. I looked beside the bed, under it, behind the door, and inside the closet. There was nowhere for someone to hide. My bedroom door was closed, and I had not heard it open. I remained sitting on the bed, trying to understand what had happened. The voice had sounded completely real. It had not sounded like a thought inside my own head. It had not sounded distant or unclear. I had heard every word, and I could still remember the feeling of breath against my skin. What bothered me most was the way the voice had said, "We're here." Not "I'm here." We're here. I did not know who we meant, and I did not want to find out. I kept the light on for a long time that night. Eventually, I convinced myself that I must have imagined it because I was tired. Maybe I had started falling asleep and experienced some strange dream. I knew people sometimes heard voices when they were between being awake and asleep. That explanation was not very convincing, but it was better than believing someone, or something, had whispered into my ear. I tried to forget about it. Then, the knocking started. A few nights later, I woke up at around 2 in the morning because I heard a faint tapping sound at my bedroom door. It was not loud. It sounded like someone trying to knock without waking the rest of the house. There would be 2 or 3 gentle taps, followed by silence. At first, I assumed it was my dad. I sat up and waited, expecting him to say my name or knock again. After a few seconds, the tapping came once more. Tap, tap, tap. I got out of bed, walked to the door, and opened it. The hallway was empty. I looked toward my dad's room and listened for movement. All the lights were off. The house was silent. I stepped into the hallway and checked both directions. There was nobody there. I even walked through part of the house to make sure my dad or stepmom was not awake. They were both asleep. I returned to my bedroom and closed the door. Less than a minute later, the tapping started again. Tap, tap. I opened the door immediately, hoping to catch whoever was doing it. Again, the hallway was empty. The knocking continued for nearly half an hour. It would stop whenever I opened the door, then begin again after I closed it. I eventually left the door open, but when I did, the tapping stopped completely. The next night, at almost exactly 2 in the morning, it happened again. The same soft knocking, the same empty hallway, the same silence whenever the door was open. After several nights, I told my dad about it. I expected him to say that the house was settling or that an animal was moving somewhere inside the wall. He listened, but neither of us could find an obvious explanation. The sound came directly from the door. It was not coming from the ceiling, the wall, or the window. When I stood beside the door, I could hear the tapping against the wood only a few inches away from me. We checked the hinges and the frame. We looked for loose pipes or anything that might make a repeated sound. Nothing explained why it happened at around 2 every morning or why it stopped whenever I opened the door. The knocking continued. Every night, usually at about the same time. Something tapped lightly on my bedroom door. Some nights it lasted only a few minutes. On other nights, it continued for nearly half an hour. The pattern was never exactly the same, but the sound always seemed careful and controlled, like a person quietly asking to be let inside. That was what made it so unsettling. Random house noises do not wait for you to close the door before starting again. I began opening the door faster, sometimes after the very first tap. I thought that if a person was playing a trick on me, I might finally catch them. I never did. There was never anyone standing in the hallway. After a while, I started inviting other people over to hear it. A few of my friends stayed the night. I also had my girlfriend over. I wanted witnesses because I was tired of wondering whether the sound was somehow only happening to me. At first, they treated it like a joke. They assumed there would be a simple explanation or that I was exaggerating. Then 2 in the morning arrived. We were sitting in my room, talking quietly and waiting. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then came the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Everyone became silent. One of my friends looked at me and asked if that was the sound I had been talking about. Before I could answer, it happened again. Tap, tap. My friend moved toward the door while another person stood behind him. He pulled it open quickly. The hallway was empty. We searched the entire area. We checked nearby rooms. We looked outside. We even checked the windows and the space beneath the house as well as we could. There was nobody there. We returned to the bedroom and shut the door. A short time later, the tapping began again. That night, all of us took turns opening the door. Sometimes we opened it slowly. Sometimes we pulled it open without warning. Once, one of my friends stood beside the door with his hand already on the handle, waiting for the next knock. As soon as the tapping came, he opened it. Nothing was there. My girlfriend heard it on another night. She was unsettled by it and did not like staying in the room after that. She agreed that the sound came from the door itself. She also agreed that it sounded exactly like someone lightly knocking from the hallway. No one could explain it. For about 6 months, the knocking happened almost every night. At first, I was terrified. I would lie awake waiting for 2 in the morning, watching the clock and listening for the first tap. Sometimes the fear of hearing it was worse than the knocking itself. Over time, however, something strange happened. I became used to it. That sounds impossible, but people can become accustomed to almost anything if it happens often enough. The knocking slowly became part of my nightly routine. I still did not like it, but I no longer jumped out of bed every time it started. Sometimes I ignored it completely. On other nights, I would say something like, "I heard you," even though I had no idea who I was speaking to. I never received an answer. There were no more whispers after the first night. Nothing appeared in the room. The door never opened by itself. Whatever was knocking seemed satisfied to remain in the hallway. Eventually, I almost convinced myself that it was harmless. Then one night, everything changed. I went to bed as usual and turned out the lights. Almost immediately, I noticed something in the corner of my bedroom. There was a shadow there. At first, I assumed it was caused by furniture or something outside the window. My eyes had not fully adjusted to the darkness, so I waited. The shadow remained. It was much darker than the rest of the room. I do not mean that it was simply a dim area. It looked like a piece of complete darkness standing in the corner. The room around it was dark, but I could still make out the shapes of my furniture. I could see the faint outline of the walls and the window. The shadow in the corner seemed to absorb all of that faint light. I stared at it, trying to understand what object could be creating the shape. There was nothing in that corner that should have cast such a shadow. I turned on the light. The corner was empty. I checked the floor, the wall, and the ceiling. I moved a few things around and looked outside the window to see whether something in the yard could be blocking the light. I found nothing. When I turned the light off again, the dark shape slowly returned. This time, I realized it was moving. It rocked gently from side to side. The movement was slow and steady, almost like a person shifting their weight from one foot to the other. I could not see a face, arms, or any clear human shape. It was simply a mass of darkness. But there was something about its height and the way it moved that made it feel like a person standing there. I turned the light on again. Nothing. I turned it off. The shadow was back. I repeated this several times, hoping I would discover some normal reason for it. Every time the light came on, the corner looked completely ordinary. Every time the room became dark, the shadow appeared again. Eventually, I left the light on and tried to sleep. I could not. Even with the lamp on, I kept looking toward the corner. I had the strong feeling that something was still standing there, even though I could no longer see it. After a while, I turned the light off again, partly because I wanted to prove to myself that the shape had been caused by tired eyes. It was still there. It continued rocking from side to side. I watched it for what felt like hours. The knocking did not happen that night. For the first time in months, there was no tapping at the door. Somehow, that made the shadow even more frightening. I began wondering whether the thing that had been knocking was now inside the room. I stayed in bed and did not move. I considered leaving, but that would have required walking past the corner. Even though the shape was several feet away from the door, I could not convince myself to get close to it. The room felt colder than usual. I do not know whether the temperature actually changed or whether fear caused that feeling, but I remember pulling the blanket higher while I watched the dark figure. It never came closer. It never stopped rocking. It simply remained in the corner until morning. When daylight finally entered the room, The shape slowly became less visible. By the time the sun had fully risen, it was gone. I got out of bed exhausted and went to find my dad and stepmom. I told them what had happened. I described the unusually dark shadow and how it had rocked back and forth in the corner throughout the night. My stepmom's expression changed immediately. She told me that she had seen the same thing. According to her, a dark shape had appeared in the corner of her room during the night. She had also watched it rock slowly from side to side. She described it before I told her every detail, which made it harder to dismiss. We had been in separate rooms, yet both of us had seen something that behaved in the same way. The three of us stood there talking about it, trying to decide whether there could be some shared cause. Maybe headlights had passed outside. Maybe tree branches had created moving shadows. Maybe something about the windows made the light behave strangely. None of those explanations worked. Our rooms were in different parts of the house. A passing car would not have created the same shape in both rooms. The movement had been too slow and regular to be caused by branches. While we were still discussing it, the back door suddenly swung open. A second later, it slammed shut with enormous force. The sound shook the room. All three of us jumped. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my dad went to check the door. There was no one outside. The weather was calm. There was no strong wind that could have pushed the door open and then pulled it shut. The door was not light or loose either. It took a fair amount of force to move it that violently. We looked around the yard and checked the nearby woods, but we did not see anyone. That was the final major incident. After that morning, the knocking stopped. It did not slowly become less frequent. It ended completely. For 6 months, something had tapped on my bedroom door almost every night. Then, after the shadow appeared in both my room and my stepmom's room, and after the back door opened and slammed shut, the nightly knocking was gone. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me found the sudden silence almost as disturbing as the noise had been. I kept expecting it to return. For weeks, I would wake up near 2 in the morning and wait for the familiar taps. Nothing happened. The hallway stayed silent. The shadow never appeared again either. Sometime later, I heard a disturbing story about a house down the road from ours. According to the rumor going around town, someone had killed and mutilated several children and hidden their bodies in an attic. I never knew exactly how much of that story was true. It became the kind of local story that changed every time someone told it. Some people claimed it had happened recently. Others said it had happened many years earlier. The number of victims was different depending on who was speaking. Even the location sometimes changed. For a while, it was all anyone seemed to talk about. I never found out whether the crime had any connection to our property or whether it had anything to do with what happened inside our house. It may have been nothing more than a terrible rumor mixed with an already frightening experience. Still, I sometimes think about the girl's voice from that first night. Don't worry, we're here. At the time, I assumed the words were meant to comfort me. Now, I am not sure. Maybe the voice belonged to someone who was trying to warn me. Maybe the knocking came from something that wanted to enter the room. Maybe the shadow was what finally entered. Or perhaps there was a normal explanation for everything. The whisper, the tapping, the moving darkness, and the door slamming by itself. I have tried to rationalize it many times. I can explain away one incident at a time. The whisper could have been a half-dream. The knocking could have been the house settling. The shadow could have been a trick of the light. The back door could have been pushed by a sudden gust of wind. But when I put everything together, those explanations become much harder to accept. Other people heard the knocking. My stepmom saw the same moving shadow without knowing exactly what I had seen. All three of us watched the back door open and slam shut while we were talking about it. Then, after 6 months, everything ended at once. I still do not know what was in that house. I only know that for half a year, something came to my bedroom door every night and quietly asked to be noticed. Then, one night, it stopped knocking. I was about 6 years old when this happened, and even though the incident itself was small, I have never been able to forget it. Nothing jumped out at me. I did not hear a strange voice or see a shadow standing in the corner. There were no doors slamming on their own and no footsteps coming from an empty room. All that happened was that one of my toys moved from one side of the couch to the other while nobody was supposed to be near it. It sounds simple when I explain it that way. It may even sound easy to dismiss. But I still remember the exact place where I left the toy, the exact place where I found it, and the sudden fear I felt when I realized that it somehow crossed the couch on its own. This happened a little before noon on an ordinary school day. At the time, I was in kindergarten. My class started later than my older brother's class, so he had already left for school earlier that morning. My mother and I were the only people at home. Our morning routine was usually quiet. My brother would leave first, and then my mother would spend some time getting me ready before taking me to school. Because my class started later, I often had time to sit in the living room and watch television while she got dressed and finished whatever she needed to do around the house. That morning did not feel different from any other. The sun was already up, and daylight filled the living room through the windows. It was not dark or stormy. There was nothing frightening about the house. I was not thinking about ghosts, monsters, or anything strange. I was simply a 6-year-old waiting for my mother to take me to class. At that age, I had a small plush bunny that I carried with me almost everywhere. I do not remember exactly what the bunny looked like now. I think it was light in color, but I cannot be certain. What I do remember is that it was soft, fluffy, and small enough for me to hold easily. Like many children, I was attached to it. It was more than just another toy sitting in my room. I carried it through the house, held it while watching television, and often kept it close whenever I was bored or tired. It had an irregular shape because of the way its arms, legs, and ears were made. It was not round like a ball, and it was not heavy enough to move very far on its own. That detail became important later. I was sitting on the right side of the living room couch with the bunny beside me while I watched television. The couch was large, probably around 6 feet from one end to the other. To me, as a small child, it seemed even bigger. I was sitting near the right armrest. The bunny was either in my hands or resting beside me while I watched whatever children's program was on. I cannot remember what show it was. The television was only there to keep me busy while my mother got ready. After a while, I became bored. I decided to see what my mother was doing. She was in the bathroom, putting on makeup. The bathroom door was open, so I could walk over and talk to her while she got ready. From where the bathroom was located, the living room couch could not be seen. Once I walked away from the living room, both the couch and my bunny were completely out of view. Before leaving, I placed the plush bunny on the right arm of the couch. I remember that clearly because I had been sitting on that side. I was not placing the toy somewhere random. I simply put it down beside the exact spot where I had been sitting. Then I walked away. I went into the bathroom and stood near my mother while she finished doing her makeup. I do not remember what we talked about. I was probably asking questions, watching her use different makeup products, or simply waiting for her to finish. The entire time, the bathroom door remained open. My mother and I were together. No one walked past us. The house was quiet. My older brother was at school. There were no other relatives visiting us. Nobody came through the front door, and nobody entered through the back. As far as we knew, there was no one else in the house. After a few minutes, my mother finished getting ready. She told me it was time to leave for kindergarten. I turned and went back toward the living room because I wanted to get my bunny before we left. I expected to find it exactly where I had placed it. Instead, when I entered the room, I stopped. The bunny was no longer on the right side of the couch. It was sitting at the complete opposite end. The toy had moved approximately 6 feet from where I had left it. I stared at it for a moment, confused. At 6 years old, my first thought was not that something supernatural had happened. I immediately assumed my older brother had done it. That seemed like the only possible explanation. My brother sometimes played jokes, and it made more sense to believe he had somehow come home early, entered the living room, moved the bunny, and hidden again without me noticing. I ran back to the bathroom and asked my mother where he was. She told me he was still at school. I asked whether he had come home. She said no. I remember feeling unsettled when she answered. If my brother had not moved the bunny, then who had? My mother had been in the bathroom the entire time. I had been standing with her. Neither of us had gone into the living room after I left the toy there. I went back and looked at the couch again. The bunny was still resting on the opposite side. It had not fallen onto the floor. It was not lying halfway across the cushions as if it had slowly slipped or rolled. It was all the way at the far end of the couch. I knew I had not placed it there. At least I believed I knew. Children can forget things, of course. 6-year-olds do not always remember events perfectly. That has been the easiest explanation for me to accept over the years. Maybe I had actually been sitting on the left side of the couch and only remembered sitting on the right. Maybe I had carried the bunny farther than I thought before placing it down. Maybe I had walked across the couch, moved it, and then immediately forgotten. Those things are possible. But even now, my memory of that moment feels unusually clear. I remember sitting beside the right arm of the couch. I remember setting the bunny on that arm before walking toward the bathroom. I remember returning a few minutes later and seeing it at the far left side. The distance between those 2 points was too large to ignore. The couch was not small. The bunny had not shifted by a few inches. It had moved from one complete end to the other. I also remember the way the toy was made. It was soft and fluffy, with long parts sticking out from its body. It could not roll smoothly, even if the couch had been tilted, which it was not. The bunny would probably have moved only a short distance before one of its arms, legs, or ears stopped it. There was no reason for it to travel across several large cushions. The couch was stable. Nobody had sat down hard enough to throw the toy across it. There was no pet in the room that could have carried it. A strong breeze could not have moved it. The toy was not made of paper, and the windows were not creating enough wind to push a stuffed animal 6 feet. There was no machine or vibration nearby that could have slowly moved it either. The bunny had simply changed positions. My mother did not seem frightened. From her point of view, I was probably just a child who had forgotten where I placed the toy. She may have assumed I was confused and did not think the event was worth investigating. I do not blame her for that. If a 6-year-old told me a stuffed bunny had moved across a couch, I would probably assume the same thing. I picked up the toy and we left for school. Nothing else happened that morning. There was no second movement. No other toys changed places. We did not hear anything from the living room while we were in the bathroom. The house remained completely normal. That should have made the incident easy to forget, but it did not. For some reason, the image stayed with me. I can still picture myself walking into the living room and immediately looking toward the right side of the couch. I can remember the empty space where I expected the bunny to be. Then I can remember noticing it at the other end. There was a brief moment when my mind could not understand what I was seeing. The toy was there, but it was in the wrong place. That kind of confusion feels especially powerful when you are a child. Adults are used to questioning their memories. They understand that people make mistakes. A child usually trusts what they have just seen and done. I had put my bunny on one side of the couch. Now it was on the other side. To me, that was not a complicated mystery. It was simply something that should not have happened. I do not remember telling anyone at school about it. I may have forgotten about the event for a while after that day. It was only as I grew older that I began to think about it again and wonder what could have caused it. Each time, I tried to find a reasonable explanation. The first possibility was my brother. Maybe he had come home for some reason, and my mother did not know. But that did not make much sense. He would have needed to return from school, enter the house quietly, walk into the living room, move the bunny, and leave again without either of us hearing him. The bathroom door was open. We likely would have heard the front door. We also would have heard footsteps or movement in the hall. My brother was young, too. It is unlikely that he could have entered and left the house so silently. My mother was also certain he was still at school. The second possibility was that my mother had moved it. Again, that seemed impossible because I was with her. She had been standing in the bathroom doing her makeup. I had gone there to watch her, and we remained together until she was ready to leave. She did not walk into the living room during that time. Even if she had somehow moved it earlier, I had placed it on the couch after sitting with it. I remembered leaving it behind before joining her. The third possibility was that the bunny had fallen, bounced, or rolled. This is the explanation I have tested most often in my mind. A smooth, round object might be able to roll across a couch if the cushions were angled. A toy car might move if someone pushed it. A ball could easily travel from one end to the other. But the bunny was not smooth or round. It had fabric ears, small legs, and a soft body. It would not roll in a straight line. If it fell from the armrest, it should have dropped onto the seat below or landed on the floor. It should not have crossed the entire couch. Even if the cushions had been uneven, gravity could not have carried it that far. The couch was not sitting on a steep slope. Both ends were at roughly the same height. The most reasonable explanation is that I moved it myself and forgot. That is the explanation I have accepted for most of my life. I was only 6 years old. My memory was still developing. Perhaps I carried the bunny with me part of the way, placed it on the left side, and then created a false memory of leaving it on the right. Maybe the whole event became more dramatic in my mind as the years passed. Memories are not perfect recordings. They change over time. Small details can shift, disappear, or become stronger than they originally were. I understand all of that. Still, there is one thing that has always bothered me. Why did I immediately ask where my brother was? If I had simply forgotten where I placed the toy, I might have picked it up without thinking. But even at 6 years old, I knew something had changed. The moment I saw the bunny, I believed someone else had moved it. I was certain enough that I ran to my mother and asked about my brother. That reaction suggests the difference was obvious to me at the time, not something I created years later. I was not looking back on an old memory and deciding the bunny had moved. I noticed it immediately. The toy was not where I had left it. There is also the strange choice of location. If I had been carrying the bunny without realizing it, why would I have placed it at the far end of the couch before going to the bathroom? I had no reason to walk across the living room and leave it there. I had been sitting on the right side. The bathroom was not in the direction of the left side of the couch. The natural thing was exactly what I remember doing, placing the bunny beside me, getting up, and walking directly to my mother. For me to move it myself, I would have had to do something unnecessary and then forget it almost immediately. Again, that is possible for a young child. but it has never felt true. Over the years, I have wondered whether something in the house moved it. I do not remember the house being haunted. We did not regularly see figures or hear unexplained voices. There were no other major incidents that I can recall. That makes the event even harder to understand. If strange things had happened often, I could connect the bunny to a larger pattern. Instead, it stands alone as one brief moment from my childhood. Maybe that is why it still bothers me. There was no explanation before it happened, and there was no explanation afterward. The bunny moved once. Then, everything returned to normal. Sometimes I think about what might have happened while my mother and I were in the bathroom. The living room was out of sight. For those few minutes, nobody was watching the couch. Did the bunny slowly slide across the cushions? Did it fall and somehow land at the other end? Did someone enter the room without making a sound? Or did something unseen pick it up and place it there? The last idea sounds ridiculous, especially when the object involved was only a child's stuffed animal. But I cannot completely dismiss it. A young child's toy would be the perfect thing to move if something wanted to get attention without causing real harm. It was an object I cared about, and it was something I would immediately notice. Whatever happened, it did not damage the toy. It did not frighten me until I realized the position had changed. It simply moved it far enough to make sure I knew. I have also wondered whether I was meant to follow it or notice something else near that side of the couch. I do not remember checking the area closely. I was too focused on finding out whether my brother was home. There may have been nothing there. Most likely, there was nothing. I am not claiming this incident proves that ghosts exist. I do not have a photograph, a video, or another witness who saw the toy move. My mother only saw me before and after it happened. She could confirm that my brother was at school and that she had been in the bathroom, but she could not confirm exactly where I had placed the bunny. All I have is my memory. That is why I have spent so many years doubting myself. A part of me says I was a child and simply made a mistake. That is the sensible answer. It requires no paranormal explanation and fits what we know about childhood memory. Another part of me remembers the empty right side of the couch and the bunny sitting 6 feet away. That part of me still feels the same confusion I felt at 6 years old. I know where I left it. I know where I found it. And I know that during the few minutes between those moments, only my mother and I were supposed to be inside the house. I have never found an explanation that completely satisfies me. Maybe I moved the bunny and forgot. Maybe my young mind mixed up the details. Or maybe, while my mother stood in the bathroom getting ready to take me to school, something entered the empty living room, crossed to the couch, and quietly moved my favorite toy from one end to the other. Whatever the truth was, the bunny never moved again. But even after all these years, I still remember the exact moment I returned to that room and saw it waiting for me on the wrong side of the couch. When I was 8 years old, I saw something standing in the doorway of my bedroom that I have never been able to forget. It happened on a cold winter evening. It was only around 7 o'clock, but because it was winter, the sun had already gone down and the house was completely dark in places where the lights were off. Outside, the air was cold and still. Inside, everything felt normal. I was downstairs playing with my toys. At that age, I could spend hours sitting on the floor with action figures, making up stories and battles in my head. I had several toys around me, but one of my favorites was missing. I realized I had left it upstairs in my bedroom. Normally, walking upstairs would not have bothered me. It was my own home. and I had used those stairs countless times. I knew every step, every corner, and exactly how far it was from the bottom of the staircase to my bedroom. But that evening, the upstairs area was dark. I could have turned on the light before going up, but I did not. Children often believe they know their own homes well enough to walk through them without seeing. I knew where the stairs were, and I knew where my room was. So I did not think I needed the light. I left my other toys downstairs and walked toward the staircase. The moment I began climbing, I noticed how dark it really was. There was a little light behind me from the downstairs area, but it did not reach far. The higher I climbed, the darker everything became. Soon I could barely see the steps in front of my feet. I continued upward slowly, using my memory of the staircase to guide me. Nothing seemed unusual at first. The house was quiet. I could not hear anyone moving upstairs. There were no strange voices, footsteps, or doors opening. I was only going to my room, picking up an action figure, and returning downstairs. When I reached the top, I turned toward my bedroom. My door was open. There was something standing inside it. At first, my mind did not understand what I was seeing. The hallway was already extremely dark, but the shape in the doorway was somehow darker than everything around it. It was not simply a shadow caused by the lack of light. It looked like a solid piece of darkness standing in front of me. The figure was enormous. Its head reached almost to the top of the doorway. The door frame was around 7 feet tall, and the thing seemed to fill nearly all of it. It did not look like a normal person. It did not have the clear outline of a man or woman. I could not make out shoulders, arms, hands, or legs in the usual way. The upper part appeared mostly like a head. Below that, the darkness continued downward in a shape that reminded me of a long cloak covering a human body. The bottom did not have clearly visible feet. It seemed to blend into the darkness of my bedroom floor. The shape was tall, narrow, and completely still. Then I saw its eyes. They were a deep sea blue color. They glowed from inside the dark head, bright enough that I could see them clearly, even though everything else around me was almost black. They did not look like reflections. When an animal's eyes catch light in the dark, they usually shine for only a moment, depending on the angle. These eyes seemed to create their own light. They were fixed directly on me. The figure was looking at me. I stopped moving. I was standing near the top of the stairs, only a short distance from my bedroom doorway. I could not step forward, but I also could not force myself to turn around and run. My body became completely stiff. I remember staring at the blue eyes and feeling as if the rest of the house had disappeared. There was only the figure and me. I knew something was wrong. Even at 8 years old, I understood that no person in my family looked like that. No one in the house was 7 feet tall. No one had glowing blue eyes or a body made from darkness. I wanted to call for someone downstairs. I could not make myself speak. My throat felt closed, and my mouth would not form the words. The figure did not move toward me. It did not raise an arm or make a threatening gesture. It simply watched. That made it worse. If it had been chasing me, I might have reacted without thinking. I might have screamed or run back down the stairs. Instead, it stood inside my bedroom as if it had been waiting for me. I do not know how long I remained there. It may have been only a few seconds, but at the time it felt much longer. Every moment seemed stretched out. I studied the figure because I could not look away. The darkness of its body had no detail. I could not see any clothing or skin. It did not seem transparent, but it also did not look solid in a normal way. It looked like an empty space shaped into something alive. The head did not have a clear face. There was no visible nose or mouth. I could not see ears, hair, or skin. There were only those blue eyes. They stared at me without blinking. I remember thinking that it knew I could see it. This was not something moving through the room without noticing me. Its attention was fully focused on me. I felt small and completely helpless. The doorway seemed too narrow because the figure filled it so completely. My favorite action figure was somewhere inside the bedroom behind it, but getting the toy no longer mattered. I only wanted the thing to disappear. I tried to tell myself it was a coat hanging on the door. Maybe clothes had been placed in the wrong position. Maybe the darkness was changing the shape of something normal, but there was no coat hanging there. Even if there had been, it could not explain the eyes. I thought it might be one of my parents trying to frighten me. That explanation also failed immediately. The figure was too tall, too dark, and too strangely shaped. A person would have moved, breathed, or said something after seeing how frightened I was. The thing remained silent. The house around me stayed completely quiet. I could hear my own breathing, although it seemed distant. My heart was beating so hard that I felt it in my chest and neck. Still, I could not move. I had never experienced fear like that before. Children are afraid of many things. They imagine monsters beneath beds, behind curtains, and inside closets. Most of those fears disappear as soon as an adult turns on the light. This was different because I was not imagining what might be inside the darkness. I could see it. I knew exactly where it was standing. I could remember the shape of it even while I was looking at it. Years later, I would still be able to draw the figure from memory. That is how clearly it stayed in my mind. Eventually, I forced myself to do the only thing I could think of. I rubbed my eyes. It was the kind of reaction a child has when something seems impossible. Part of me believed that if I closed my eyes for a moment and opened them again, the figure might turn into an ordinary shadow. I lifted my hands and rubbed both eyes. For those few seconds, I could no longer see the doorway. When I lowered my hands, the figure was gone. The doorway was empty. The blue eyes had disappeared. My bedroom beyond the door looked dark and normal. I remained where I was, staring into the room. I expected the figure to reappear. It did not. I looked toward the corners and the space behind the door. Nothing moved. I do not remember turning on the light. I may have been too frightened to think about it. Somehow, I entered the bedroom. I moved quickly, grabbed my action figure, and left. I did not search the room. I did not look inside the closet or beneath the bed. I wanted to get downstairs as fast as possible. Once I returned to the light and safety of the lower floor, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined everything. I told myself I had been frightened by the darkness. Maybe my eyes had created a shape from the doorway and the objects inside my room. Perhaps the blue eyes had been small lights from a toy. Action figures and electronic toys sometimes had painted parts that reflected light. Maybe two objects had been positioned in a way that looked like eyes. That explanation was possible. But I had never seen anything like that in the room before. I also knew the difference between a small toy and a figure filling an entire doorway. The thing had appeared alive. It had not seemed like several objects forming a random shape. I had felt it watching me. Still, I did not tell anyone. I was sure they would not believe me. Adults often dismiss the frightening things children say they see. They assume the child had a nightmare, misunderstood a shadow, or created a story after becoming scared. Maybe that is exactly what happened. I had no proof. No one else had been standing beside me. By the time anyone checked the room, there would have been nothing there. I did not want to be laughed at or told I was imagining things, so I kept the experience to myself. For a long time afterward, I became nervous whenever I had to go upstairs in the dark. I turned on the lights before climbing the stairs. If my bedroom door was open, I looked carefully before entering. Sometimes I stood at the bottom of the staircase and remembered those blue eyes staring down the hallway. The figure never appeared there again. Nothing else unusual happened in the house that I can remember. There were no strange sounds in my room. Objects did not move. I did not wake up with scratches or find marks near the doorway. The incident seemed to happen once and then end. Over time, the fear became less intense. I grew older and learned how easily darkness can affect the human mind. When we cannot see clearly, the brain tries to complete missing shapes. A pile of clothes can look like a person. A shadow can appear to move. Small lights can seem like eyes. I began using those explanations whenever I thought about the figure. I was 8 years old. I was alone in a dark hallway. I expected my room to be empty, and perhaps my imagination created something frightening when I turned toward the doorway. That was the sensible answer. But the memory never completely faded. I can still see the height of the figure. I can still picture the dark, cloak-like body. I can still remember the deep blue color of its eyes. Most childhood fears become vague with time. You remember being scared, but you forget the details of what frightened you. This was the opposite. The details stayed. Even now, I could draw what I saw. I might not capture it perfectly, but I could show the shape of the head, the way the body flowed down like a cloak, and the position of the glowing eyes. Years later, the figure began appearing in my dreams. The dreams do not happen every night. They appear only occasionally, sometimes after long periods when I have not thought about the original incident at all. In the dream, I usually see the same thing. The dark figure is standing somewhere ahead of me. Sometimes it is in my old bedroom doorway. Other times it appears in a place I do not recognize. The surroundings can change, but the figure always looks the same. It is tall. Its body is covered in complete darkness. Its blue eyes stare directly at me. In the original experience, the figure never moved. In the dreams, it does. It begins walking toward me. The movement is slow. It does not rush or chase me like a creature in a normal nightmare. It simply comes closer, one step at a time. I can see it approaching, but I cannot move. My body feels frozen in the same way it did when I was 8. I try to run, but my legs do not respond. I try to shout, but no sound comes out. The figure continues forward. The blue eyes remain fixed on me. Sometimes I wake up before it gets close. Other times it reaches a point where it is only a few feet away. I usually wake with my heart racing, feeling as if something had been standing beside my bed. The room is always empty. I know dreams often reuse powerful childhood memories. The figure may appear because the original experience frightened me so deeply. My mind may simply be repeating the fear in different forms. That is probably the most logical explanation. But the dreams still disturb me because the creature never changes. Its appearance remains consistent even after all these years. The same height, the same shape, the same eyes. I have wondered whether the dreams are only dreams or whether the thing I saw somehow stayed connected to me. I know how that sounds. I am not claiming a supernatural creature follows me or visits me while I sleep. I have no evidence of that. But it is difficult not to wonder when the same figure continues returning. Sometimes I think it was never truly inside my bedroom. Maybe it existed only in my imagination, and the dreams are proof that my mind created it. Other times, I think the opposite. Maybe I really saw something that night, and the dreams are the only way it can still reach me. The fact that it only stared at me during the original event also raises questions. Why did it not come closer then? Why did it disappear when I rubbed my eyes? Did it leave because I broke eye contact? Was the figure unable to remain when I stopped looking? Or was rubbing my eyes enough to correct a visual mistake caused by darkness? That last explanation is the safest. Perhaps my eyes adjusted while they were closed. When I opened them again, the objects in my room no longer formed the same shape. But even if the figure was an illusion, I still do not know what created those glowing blue eyes. There were no strong blue lights inside the room. I would have remembered a toy or electronic device shining near the doorway. The eyes appeared inside the figure's head, exactly where real eyes would be. They were the only part of it with color. I have never told anyone the full story. I have thought about doing it many times, but I always stop myself. The experience sounds too strange. A 7-foot-tall, dark creature with blue eyes standing in a child's bedroom doorway sounds like something taken from a horror film or a fantasy story. People would probably assume I had invented it. Others might say I experienced a waking dream or childhood hallucination. Maybe they would be right. I was young, and it happened many years ago. But I did not wake from sleep and see it. I had been downstairs playing. I decided to get a toy. I walked up the stairs while fully awake. I turned toward my bedroom. It was standing there. The sequence has always remained clear. I sometimes wish someone else had been with me. If another person had seen the figure, I would know it was real. If they had seen only an empty doorway, I could accept that my mind had created it. Instead, I was alone. That means I will probably never have a definite answer. All I can do is compare the experience with what I know now. People sometimes report seeing shadow figures. They describe shapes darker than the rooms around them, often tall and human-like. Some have glowing eyes, others appear near doorways, bedrooms, or staircases. I did not know those stories when I was 8. I had not read about shadow people or paranormal creatures. I had no reason to create that specific image. That does not prove anything, but it makes the memory harder for me to dismiss. Maybe many people experience similar visual mistakes in darkness. Perhaps the brain naturally creates tall human shapes when it cannot understand a shadow. Our minds are designed to recognize faces and bodies quickly, especially when we may be in danger. That could explain the similarities. But those explanations do not change how real it felt. I was not looking at a vague shadow and wondering whether it might be a person. I believed something was looking back at me. Its attention felt direct and intelligent. It was not simply present in the doorway. It knew I was there. Even now, when I remember the encounter, I feel the same helplessness. I see myself standing at the top of the stairs, too frightened to move. I see the darkness around the bedroom. Then the eyes appear, deep blue, bright, completely fixed on me. The figure never spoke. It never touched me. It did not need to. Seeing it was enough. Maybe the entire experience lasted only a few seconds. Maybe my childhood mind added details over time. Memory can change, especially when fear is involved. I accept that possibility. But if the memory changed, it changed very little. The image I have now is the same one I had immediately afterward. A head without a visible face, 2 glowing blue eyes, a long, dark body shaped like a cloak, a height that nearly filled the doorway. Then nothing after I rubbed my eyes. The room was empty, but the image remained. It has remained for years. It returns in dreams when I least expect it. In those dreams, the figure no longer waits inside the doorway. It walks toward me. I do not know whether that means anything. It may only be my mind turning a still childhood memory into a moving nightmare. But every time it approaches, I feel 8 years old again. I cannot run. I cannot speak. I can only watch the blue eyes come closer. I still have not told anyone in my real life. Perhaps writing it down is the closest I will ever come. I know many people will not believe it. I understand why. I might not believe it either if someone else told me the same story. But I know what I saw that winter night. I went upstairs to get my favorite action figure. My bedroom door was open. And standing inside, it was something darker than the darkness around it, watching me with glowing blue eyes. I rubbed my eyes and it disappeared. But in my dreams, it is still coming closer.
We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.
When I was in high school, about 10 years ago now, I dated the same girl through most of my junior and senior years. We had been together long enough that I had already met most of her family. But there were still certain visits I never looked forward to. One of those was going to see her mother and her mother's boyfriend. One weekend, my girlfriend told me we had family obligations. That was the phrase she used, which usually meant there was no polite way to get out of whatever had already been planned. We were expected to spend the day with her mom, who lived about an hour away from our hometown. I remember sighing when she told me. It was not that I hated her mother. She was nice enough in her own way. She had never really done anything bad to me. She was just difficult to be around for long periods of time because everything with her felt dramatic. She was deeply interested in witches, magic, spirits, and Wicca, although at the time I did not even know how the word was spelled. She wore black almost every time I saw her. She had dark jewelry, strange symbols on necklaces, large rings, and the kind of clothing that made it look as if Halloween was not a holiday, but a year-round lifestyle. None of it was really my thing, but I tried not to judge her for it. Everyone has their own interests, and as long as she was not hurting anyone, I did not care what she believed. I just knew I was probably going to spend the day hearing about spells, ghosts, strange energy, or some other subject that I did not believe in. My girlfriend's mother lived in a small town filled with older houses. A lot of them had a colonial look, with tall windows, narrow staircases, old wooden floors, and dark roofs. The whole town looked as if it had been standing there for a few hundred years without changing very much. The house itself was old, too. From the outside, it did not seem especially frightening. It was large and weathered, but it was still just a house. The street was quiet, the yard was neat enough, and there was nothing that immediately made me think something was wrong with the place. That changed when we stepped inside. The first thought that entered my head was that the house looked like a copy of the Addams family home. I'm not exaggerating. There were dark purple curtains hanging over the windows. Candles were burning in different rooms, even though it was the middle of the day. Gargoyle statues sat on shelves and tables. There were dark paintings, old-looking decorations, strange pieces of jewelry, and objects that looked as if they had been collected from antique shops or old graveyards. Everywhere I looked, there was something meant to appear mysterious or unsettling. I could not tell whether the house naturally felt creepy or whether it had been carefully decorated to feel that way. Either way, the effect worked. Her mother greeted us warmly and began giving us a tour. I followed along and tried to be respectful. I thanked her for having us, smiled at the right moments, and avoided making jokes about the decorations. At first, the tour was ordinary. She showed us the living room, the kitchen, the stairs, and a few other parts of the house. Then the ghost stories began. She told us the house was haunted, not by one ghost, but 3. According to her, 2 of them were adult men, and the third was a young girl. She spoke about them as if they were roommates she had learned to live with rather than dead people haunting her home. She claimed doors open and slammed by themselves. Cabinets moved when no one was standing near them. Objects disappeared and later showed up in places where they did not belong. She said her hairbrush was one of the things that moved most often. She described all of it with complete confidence. My girlfriend and I exchanged a look. We both knew her mother had a reputation for exaggerating. She loved telling stories, and she had a way of making ordinary events sound much more dramatic than they probably were. If a door closed because of a draft, it became a spirit. If something went missing, it had been moved by a ghost. At least that was what I assumed. My girlfriend looked as doubtful as I felt. We rolled our eyes when her mother was not looking and continued following her through the house. I was not frightened. I was barely even interested. I believed the whole thing was part of her personality. She liked the idea of living in a haunted house, and maybe after telling the stories enough times, she had convinced herself they were true. Eventually, the tour brought us into the kitchen. There was a whiteboard attached to the refrigerator with a marker hanging beside it. My girlfriend picked up the marker and began writing something. She had started to relax again, and I think she was trying to make fun of the situation. She wrote on the board and then said something like, "Come out, little ghost girl." I was only half paying attention. By that point, I had already started thinking about how many hours we had left before we could drive home. I was standing there, staring around the kitchen, counting down the minutes in my head. Then I heard the marker hit the floor. The sound was small, but it immediately caught my attention. I looked at my girlfriend. Her face had gone completely pale. She was standing perfectly still in front of the refrigerator, staring straight ahead. Her hands were slightly raised, and she looked as if she were afraid to move. I asked her what was wrong. For a few seconds, she did not answer. Then she slowly turned toward me. She said, "I know this sounds completely crazy, but I swear someone just breathed on the back of my neck." She looked genuinely terrified. She said she wanted to leave. I wish I could say I took her seriously, but I did not. I laughed. I told her she had allowed her mother's stories to get into her head. I said she was imagining things because she had just challenged the supposed ghost. I told her to relax and stop frightening herself. She insisted the breath had felt real. She said it had been cold and close, as if someone had leaned down behind her and breathed directly against her skin. I looked behind her, checked the area, and found nothing. No open window, no fan. No one standing close enough to cause it. Still, I did not believe her. I was convinced it was nerves. Her mother had filled her head with stories, and now she was reacting to every small sensation in the house. The afternoon continued. The 4 of us ate lunch together and talked. Of course, the conversation returned to the ghosts. My girlfriend's mother told more stories about the house and the 3 spirits she believed lived there. At first, I listened politely. Then her boyfriend began agreeing with her. That surprised me more than anything else had. Her mother was one thing. She was dramatic, unusual, and clearly wanted to believe in the paranormal. Her boyfriend, however, seemed completely different. I had only met him a few times, but he had always seemed calm, practical, and down to earth. He was the kind of person I would have expected to laugh at ghost stories, not support them. Yet he confirmed what she was saying. He said he had heard doors slam when no one was near them. He had seen objects move or appear in different places. He spoke as if the activity in the house was simply something he had accepted. That forced me to reconsider the situation for a moment. I still did not believe in ghosts, but I did wonder why he was agreeing with her. Maybe he was only trying to keep her happy. Maybe he had learned that arguing with her was pointless, so he simply supported whatever she said. Or maybe he had lived in the house long enough to start interpreting normal sounds the same way she did. I could imagine how that might happen. If someone constantly told you a house was haunted, you might start noticing things you would normally ignore. Every creak would become footsteps. Every missing object would become evidence. Every shadow would look like a figure. That was the explanation I preferred. My girlfriend, however, was becoming more frightened as the conversation continued. The experience in the kitchen had clearly affected her. She kept touching the back of her neck and looking toward the doorway whenever she heard a sound. She was ready to leave. For me, that was excellent news. I had been waiting for an excuse to end the visit, and her fear seemed like the perfect reason. Before we could leave, however, her mother and I began arguing. It was not a serious fight at first. It was more of a debate about whether the house was really haunted. She said she knew the ghosts were real. I said there had to be a normal explanation. She told me I was too closed-minded. I told her stories were not proof. She then said she could prove it. That got my attention. She told me that one day she had been doing chores around the house when the ghost of the little girl appeared in front of the washer and dryer. She claimed the apparition had slowly come into focus. Fortunately, according to her, a digital camera had been sitting nearby on a table. She grabbed it and took a picture. I did not believe a word of it. I told her to show me. I expected her to make an excuse. Instead, she said she would get the camera and left the room. A minute later, she returned holding a small digital camera. At that point, I was curious, but not because I thought she had photographed a ghost. I wanted to see what ordinary blur, shadow, or reflection she had mistaken for a little girl. She pressed the power button. Nothing happened. She tried again and then announced that the battery was dead. I immediately became smug. I remember looking at her and saying something like, "Really? What a crazy coincidence." To me, that proved everything. Of course, the camera would be dead. Of course, she had the perfect photograph, but could not show it to me. It was exactly the kind of excuse I expected. She did not seem embarrassed, though. Instead, she told us to wait because she thought she had a spare battery somewhere. She left again. I looked at my girlfriend, probably with a smile on my face, because I believed I had won the argument. I assumed her mother would return without the battery or would suddenly remember that the photograph had been deleted. A few minutes later, she came back holding another battery. She placed it into the camera, turned it on, and the screen lit up. That was the first moment I felt slightly less confident. She began scrolling through the photographs. There were ordinary pictures of the house, family members, random objects, and things I do not remember. She kept going for a couple of minutes, searching for the right image. Finally, she stopped. She held the camera out to me. I took it. The photograph showed the area in front of the washer and dryer. At first, I did not see anything unusual. I stared at the small screen. searching for the kind of thing people usually point to in supposed ghost photographs. I expected a glowing orb, a strange reflection, a dark shadow, or some blurry shape in the background. There was nothing obvious. I almost laughed again. Then her mother moved closer and pointed at the screen. She said, "No, look. There's a transparent little girl." She pointed out the eyes first, then the nose, then the mouth. I adjusted the angle of the camera and looked more carefully. For a second, I still did not see it. Then the image came into focus in my mind. The moment I saw it, every hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was a little girl in the photograph. She was standing directly in front of the washer and dryer. She was not solid. She appeared transparent, almost as if the room behind her could be seen through her body. But the shape was clear enough that I could make out a face. There were eyes, a nose, a mouth. The figure had the size and proportions of a young child. Once I saw her, I could not stop seeing her. This was not a random blur that required a great deal of imagination. It was not one of those photographs where someone circles a dark window and claims there is a face inside it. The figure looked complete. It looked like a little girl had been standing there when the picture was taken, but not a living one. I kept staring at the screen. My first thought was that it had to be fake. I wondered whether the camera had some kind of filter. I wondered whether someone had edited the image on a computer. I thought it might be a double exposure, a reflection, or a trick involving glass. But the more I looked, the less those explanations seemed to fit. This was an ordinary digital camera. Her mother had not known we were coming over to challenge her about ghosts. She had not prepared a presentation. She had not immediately shown us the image. The battery had actually been dead, and she had needed to search for another one. The photograph looked old enough that it had clearly been taken before our visit. There was no obvious sign of editing. I asked questions. Had she taken the picture through a window? No. Had anyone else been in the room? No. Was there a child in the house that day? No. Had she changed the photo in any way? She said she had not. I wanted to dismiss her answer because I already believed she exaggerated everything. But I was holding the camera myself. The image was right there. It was not a story anymore. I could see it. The figure was standing only a few feet from where I was at that moment. I looked away from the camera and toward the washer and dryer. The room suddenly felt different. Before seeing the photograph, the house had seemed theatrical to me. The dark curtains, candles, gargoyles, and ghost stories had felt like decoration. Now the whole place felt much less harmless. I thought about my girlfriend standing in the kitchen and saying someone had breathed on her neck after she called out to the little girl. I had laughed at her. Now I was not laughing. I handed the camera back and told my girlfriend we were leaving. I did not want to continue the argument. I did not want to hear another story. I did not want to inspect the room or try to recreate the photograph. I only wanted to get out of that house. I took my girlfriend by the arm, said a quick goodbye, and moved toward the door. I probably looked ridiculous after spending the entire afternoon acting like the smartest person in the room, but I did not care. We left as quickly as we could. Once we were outside, I felt a huge sense of relief. The drive home was much quieter than the drive there. My girlfriend reminded me that she had felt someone breathe on her neck. I did not have a good answer for her anymore. I could no longer tell her she had imagined it. I still tried to think logically about the photograph. I went through every possible explanation in my head. Maybe her mother had created it as a joke. Maybe the camera had malfunctioned. Maybe there had been some kind of reflection or movement during the shot. Maybe the image only looked like a child, because the human brain is good at seeing faces and figures where none exist. Those explanations might have helped if the shape had been vague. It was not vague. I remember the face. I remember how the figure stood in front of the machines. I remember the way the body seemed transparent. Most of all, I remember the exact moment when the image suddenly became clear to me. 1 second, I was looking at an ordinary laundry room. The next, I could see a dead child standing in it. My girlfriend and I broke up years later, and eventually we lost contact completely. I have no idea what happened to her mother's boyfriend, or the house. I also do not know what happened to the photograph. Maybe her mother still has it. Maybe the camera was lost. Maybe the picture was transferred to a computer or shown to other people. I've often wondered whether she ever tried to submit it somewhere, or have it examined by someone who knew more about photography. I wish I had asked for a copy. At the time, however, that was the last thing on my mind. I was too frightened and too eager to leave. Part of me also wonders whether the photograph would still look as convincing to me now. I was a teenager then. Maybe age and experience would help me notice some explanation I missed. But I also know what I saw. I was not someone who wanted to believe in ghosts. I was actively arguing against the idea. I went into that house expecting every strange story to have a normal explanation. I laughed at my girlfriend when she became frightened. I mocked her mother when the camera would not turn on. I had every reason to reject that photograph. Instead, it changed my mind in a matter of seconds. I am still not the kind of person who believes every paranormal story I hear. Most ghost photographs are easy to explain. Many are fake. Others are dust, reflections, shadows, or camera problems. But that picture was different. I know this is only the word of a stranger on the internet. I do not have the photograph to prove what I am saying. I understand why people might doubt me, especially because I would probably doubt the story too if someone else told it. Still, I swear it happened exactly as I remember it. The house was real. The stories were real. My girlfriend felt something breathe on the back of her neck. And on that camera was a photograph of a transparent little girl standing in front of a washer and dryer only a few feet from where I was standing. I have forgotten many things from high school. I have forgotten conversations, classes, parties, and people I once saw every day. I have never forgotten that picture. Even after all these years, I can still see the little girl's face. About 2 years ago, something happened to me in the middle of the night that I still cannot explain. It happened during the Christian observance of Jesus being crucified. I do not remember every detail of the day before it happened, because nothing unusual had taken place. I had gone through my normal routine, and by midnight, I was already in bed. The room was dark and quiet. I was not watching anything frightening. I had not been talking about ghosts, death, or anything supernatural. I was simply lying there, trying to rest. Then, without warning, I felt a strange pain in my chest. It did not feel like a sharp pain or a sudden stabbing sensation. It was slow and dull, but extremely intense. The best way I can describe it is that it felt as if my heart was being crushed, little by little. There was no weight pressing down on me. Nothing had fallen onto my chest. I was not lying in an unusual position, and I had not injured myself. I was simply in bed when the pain began. At first, I thought it would pass quickly. Instead, it became worse. The pressure felt deep inside my chest, close to where my heart was. It was different from any normal ache I had felt before. There was something wrong about it. Something that made me feel as if the pain was not coming from my body alone. I know that sounds strange. Pain usually has a source. You sleep in the wrong position, strain a muscle, get sick, or hurt yourself. Even when you do not know the exact cause, it still feels physical. This did not feel that way. It felt as though the pain had been placed inside me. The longer it continued, the more frightened I became. I tried to move, but I could not. My entire body felt frozen. I could see my room. I was aware of where I was. I knew I was awake, or at least I believed I was awake. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not sit up, turn over, or lift my arms. It was as if something had pinned me to the bed without touching me. I tried to call out, but I could not make my voice work properly. I wanted to shout for someone in the house, especially because the pain in my chest was becoming unbearable, but my body would not respond. All I could do was breathe and look around. My eyes moved toward the opposite side of the bedroom. That was when I saw it. There was a silhouette standing across the room. At first, I was not sure what I was looking at. The room was dark, so most of the furniture had turned into rough shapes. But this silhouette did not belong there. It was much larger than a normal person. I could not make out any details. There was no clear face, no clothing, and no visible skin. It was only a dark shape standing in the room. The strange part was that it did not seem to be looking at me. It appeared to be facing away. That should have made it less frightening, but it did not. Seeing something large standing in the darkness with its back turned to me was somehow worse. It felt as if it knew I was there but had no need to look at me. The silhouette remained completely still. I stared at it, trying to understand whether it could be a shadow caused by something in the room. I looked for the outline of furniture or an object that might explain the shape. Nothing made sense. There had never been anything in that part of the bedroom that looked so large. The shape seemed to rise higher than the objects around it. It looked solid enough to be present, but dark enough that it had no real features. The pain in my chest continued. Each second felt longer than the one before it. I kept trying to move. I told myself to lift one hand, turn my head, or move one leg. Nothing happened. My body felt disconnected from my mind. I was trapped inside myself. I remember wondering if I was dying. The pain around my heart was so deep and heavy that I thought something inside my chest might stop working. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I would not open them again. So I kept watching the silhouette. It never moved toward me. It never turned around. It simply stood at the opposite side of the room while the pain continued. I do not know exactly how long the experience lasted, but it felt like around 30 minutes. That is a long time to lie completely still while feeling as if your heart is being slowly crushed. At some point, the pain began to weaken. It did not stop all at once. The pressure slowly became less intense, as if whatever was causing it was gradually releasing its grip. As the pain faded, I began to feel my body again. First, I could move my fingers. Then I was able to shift slightly in the bed. A short time later, I could move normally. At the same time, the silhouette began to disappear. It did not walk away. It did not move into another part of the room. It simply became less clear. The darkness around it seemed to blend with the rest of the room until the large shape was no longer there. Once it was gone, the room looked normal again. The pain had also stopped. I sat up as soon as I could and looked toward the place where the silhouette had been standing. There was nothing there. I checked the area carefully. I looked at the furniture, the wall, and anything else that might have created a shadow. Nothing matched what I had seen. The room was exactly as it had always been. I was badly shaken, but the experience became even stranger when I learned that my brother had also been going through something at around the same time. During the same night, and within the same period, he had an extreme fit. I do not know whether the two events were connected. It could have been a coincidence. We were in the same house, but we were not in the same room, and neither of us knew what the other was experiencing at that moment. Still, the timing disturbed me. While I was unable to move and felt as if my heart was being crushed, my brother was also suffering through something intense. That was difficult to dismiss. I have tried to explain my experience in different ways. The inability to move could have been sleep paralysis. I know people can wake up while their bodies are still in a sleep state. They can see shapes, feel pressure, and believe something is in the room. That explanation makes sense in some ways. But the pain is harder for me to understand. The pressure in my chest did not feel like an ordinary weight. It felt deeper, as if it were inside my heart rather than on top of my body. The silhouette also seemed unusually clear. It was not a face near the bed or a quick shadow in the corner. It was a large figure standing across the room, facing away from me, remaining there for what felt like a very long time. Then it disappeared at almost the same time the pain stopped. Even if it was sleep paralysis, it was the most frightening thing I'd ever experienced at that point. But it was not the first time something connected to death had happened in my life. About 6 years ago, my grandmother passed away. I was much younger then. The night she died, something happened that I did not understand until later. She called me. It was the middle of the night, and my phone was downstairs. I did not hear it ringing when it happened. I was upstairs and either sleeping or too far away to notice. Later, I saw the missed call notification. I remember looking at it and dismissing it. I did not call back. At the time, I did not think it was important. I was young, and I assumed I could speak to her later. A missed call from a family member did not seem unusual or urgent. There was no reason for me to believe it might be the last time she would ever try to contact me. That evening, at around 6 o'clock, my dad went to her house. He found her dead. The call had come around the time she passed away. That is the part that has stayed with me. I do not know exactly what condition she was in when the call was made. I do not know whether she had picked up the phone herself, called my number, and then died shortly afterward. I do not know whether the timing was exact to the minute. All I know is that she called me during the night. I did not answer, and by the next evening, she was gone. When I learned what had happened, the missed call suddenly felt different. It was no longer just a notification I had ignored. It became her final attempt to reach me. I began thinking about what she might have wanted to say. Maybe she felt something was wrong and wanted help. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she simply wanted to hear my voice. Or maybe she had called by mistake, and the timing had no deeper meaning. I will never know. That uncertainty has stayed with me for years. I was too young to understand the weight of it when it first happened. As I grew older, the memory became more painful. I kept wondering whether things might have been different if I had answered. Could I have helped her? Could I have warned my father? Could someone have reached her sooner? These questions have no clear answer, but they return whenever I think about that night. The truth is that I was a child. My phone was downstairs. The call came in the middle of the night. I had no reason to believe she was in danger. Still, guilt does not always follow logic. Part of me continues to feel that I failed her. After her death, I began seeing her in my dreams. At first, I thought it was a normal part of grieving. When someone dies, especially someone close to you, it is natural to dream about them. Your mind tries to process the loss. But the dreams did not stop. Even now, years later, she still appears. Sometimes the dreams are not frightening at first. I will see her in a familiar place, and for a moment, everything feels normal. She might be standing in a room, sitting somewhere, or simply looking at me. Then I remember that she is dead. The moment I realize it, the dream changes. Sometimes she looks sad. Sometimes she says nothing. At other times, there is something wrong with the way she appears. She may look like herself, but there is a heaviness around her, as if she is carrying the memory of her death with her. I wake up with the feeling that she was not only part of a dream. It feels as if she came to see me. I know dreams can feel real. The mind can create faces, voices, and emotions with incredible detail. I understand that seeing her in my sleep does not prove she is haunting me. But the dreams have continued for so long that I cannot completely dismiss them. There is always the missed call between us. Whenever she appears, I think about the phone ringing downstairs. I think about the notification I saw later. I think about the fact that I dismissed it without calling her back. Sometimes I wonder whether she appears in my dreams because I never answered. Maybe she is still trying to reach me. Maybe there was something she wanted to say that night, and because I did not hear it, she continues to return. Other times, I believe the dreams are created by my own guilt. Perhaps I am the one who keeps bringing her back because I cannot forgive myself. That explanation may be more realistic, but it does not make the dreams feel less disturbing. There is something frightening about seeing a dead relative over and over, especially when your last connection to them was a missed call. The experience with the silhouette in my bedroom made me think about my grandmother again. Both events happened at night. Both involved a feeling that something was near me, but could not be understood. During the first event, I felt trapped in my body while a large figure stood across the room. During the earlier event, my grandmother tried to call me shortly before she was found dead. I cannot prove that either event was supernatural. Maybe the silhouette was sleep paralysis. Maybe the pain in my chest had a physical cause. Maybe my brother's fit happening at the same time was only a coincidence. Maybe my grandmother's call was ordinary, and the dreams are only grief. I have repeated these explanations to myself many times. They are possible. They may even be correct. But they do not remove the feeling that something connects all of it. The night of the silhouette felt wrong from the beginning. The pain did not feel like it belonged to me. The figure did not seem like an ordinary shadow. It stood there as if it had a reason to be present. The timing during the religious observance made the whole experience feel even heavier. I am not saying the event had a religious meaning. I do not know enough to make that claim. But I remember thinking about suffering, death, and sacrifice while I lay there, unable to move. It felt as if I had been forced to experience a small part of something terrible. Then there was my brother, suffering at the same time. That detail is what I return to most often. If I had been the only person experiencing something that night, I could accept sleep paralysis and move on. But knowing that my brother was also going through an extreme episode during the same period makes the event more difficult to explain. It was as if something had entered the house and affected both of us in different ways. I do not know what the silhouette was. It may not have been connected to my grandmother at all. It may not have been a spirit, a warning, or anything supernatural. But when I remember the way it stood with its back turned to me, I still feel uneasy. It did not need to face me. It did not need to speak. Its presence was enough. The pain, the paralysis, and the figure all disappeared together after around 30 minutes. That is too organized for my mind to forget. Since then, I have become more aware of strange experiences. I do not immediately believe every ghost story, but I also do not dismiss them as quickly as I once might have. There are moments in life that do not fit cleanly into normal explanations. Sometimes something happens only once, leaving behind no evidence except memory. That does not make it easy to understand. It only makes it easier for others to doubt. I still dream about my grandmother. Sometimes I wake up and feel that I should check my phone. For a few seconds, I expect to see her name on the screen again. Then I remember that 6 years have passed. There will never be another ordinary call from her. The one call I had was the one I missed. That is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I do not know whether she is haunting my dreams or whether I am haunted by my own regret. Maybe there's no real difference. The result is the same. She continues to return. And whenever I think about that night 2 years ago, I remember the large silhouette standing across my bedroom while my heart felt as if it were being slowly crushed. I remember being unable to move. I remember watching it face away from me. I remember the pain ending only when the figure disappeared. Most people would probably call it sleep paralysis. They may be right, but I know what it felt like. Something was in that room. And for 30 minutes, while my brother suffered somewhere else in the house, it stood in the darkness and waited. About 35 years ago, a girlfriend and I were driving home through a small town in Oklahoma when we saw something that neither of us could explain. It was late, probably around midnight or even later. At that hour, the roads around town were usually empty. Most people were already home, the businesses were closed, and there were very few lights apart from porch lamps, street lights, and the occasional glow from a distant house. Small towns can feel completely different after midnight. During the day, everything is familiar. You recognize the roads, the fields, the houses, and the people passing by. At night, the same places seem larger and more isolated. The open land becomes completely black, and you can drive for long stretches without seeing another car. I had driven those roads many times before, so I was not worried about being out late. My friend and I were talking as we traveled home, probably discussing ordinary things that I no longer remember. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then I noticed a light in the sky. I do not know why it caught my attention. Maybe it appeared brighter than everything around it, or perhaps its position seemed strange. Whatever the reason, I kept looking at it while I drove. At first, I thought it was a star. It was only a single point of light, and from a distance, it did not have a clear shape. I could not see wings, flashing signals, or anything that immediately identified it as an aircraft. But the longer I watched, the less it looked like a star. It appeared much brighter. It also seemed closer to the ground. Stars feel distant and fixed. Even when they look bright, there is still a sense that they are far above everything around you. This light did not seem that far away. It looked as though it were somewhere over the road or nearby fields. I pointed it out to my friend. I remember telling her that it looked like it was following us. At the time, I may have said it partly as a joke. When you drive at night, distant objects can seem to move with you. The moon is the most obvious example. A star, radio tower, or faraway light can remain visible from the same angle for several miles, creating the illusion that it is traveling beside the car. That was probably what I expected was happening. Still, I kept watching it. Every time the road curved or we changed direction slightly, the light seemed to remain with us. It did not disappear behind trees or buildings the way I expected. It stayed in view, bright and steady. My friend looked at it too. I do not remember exactly what she said, but I know she noticed it. The light was not something only I could see. That became important later. If I had been alone, I might have eventually convinced myself that I misunderstood what happened. I might have blamed tiredness, poor visibility, or my own imagination. But another person was in the car, watching the same light. We continued driving. The roads became quieter as we moved away from the center of town. There were fewer houses, and the darkness around us became deeper. The headlights illuminated only a narrow area of road in front of the car. The light remained above us or somewhere ahead. I tried to judge its distance, but that was impossible. At night, a small, bright object nearby can look similar to a large object much farther away. It might have been a plane traveling in our general direction. It could have been a helicopter with a powerful searchlight. Those were reasonable explanations, although I do not remember hearing the sound of an engine or rotors. There was only the steady noise of our own car and the conversation between us. As we got closer to home, I turned onto the road where we lived. It was a familiar turn. I knew the road well and had no reason to expect anything unusual. The moment I completed the turn, everything changed. The light was suddenly directly in front of us. 1 second, it had been in the sky. The next, it was low over the road, close enough that it seemed to block our path. I did not see it move gradually downward. It did not drift toward us like a helicopter. It appeared to zip from its position above us to a point directly ahead at an incredible speed. The movement was almost instant. That is the detail I have never been able to explain. The light did not approach from a distance. It seemed to cross the space between the sky and the road faster than my eyes could properly follow. Suddenly, it was there. It was bright enough to dominate everything in front of us. I could no longer think of it as a star or distant aircraft. It felt close. I do not remember seeing a solid object around the light. There may have been one, hidden by the brightness or darkness, but I could not make out any metal body, wings, windows, or other structure. All I could see was the light. My friend and I began screaming. The change had happened too quickly for either of us to stay calm. We had been watching something that seemed distant, and then it appeared directly in our path without warning. I reacted without thinking. I began honking the horn repeatedly. I do not know what I expected the horn to do. Maybe it was an instinctive reaction, the same way someone might honk at an animal or another vehicle blocking the road. Perhaps I hoped that if a person was controlling whatever was ahead of us, they would move. I threw the car into reverse. My only thought was to get away. I did not carefully check behind us or consider whether another vehicle might be approaching. The road had been empty, and fear took control before I could think logically. The car moved backward while both of us continued screaming. I kept looking through the windshield at the light. Then it disappeared from the road. Almost immediately, it was back in the sky. Again, I did not see it rise normally. It did not slowly climb, becoming smaller as it gained altitude. One moment, it was close to the ground in front of us. The next, it was high above us again. The movement happened in what felt like the blink of an eye. There was no smooth path between the two positions. It was as though the light had been switched off on the road and switched on again in the sky. For a moment, I sat there in shock. Then I stopped reversing, put the car back into drive, and raced toward home. I did not care about speed limits. I did not want to stop anywhere along the road. I only wanted to reach a house filled with other people and get away from whatever we had seen. I kept glancing in the mirrors and looking through the windshield. The light was still visible above us, but I do not remember whether it continued following the car after that. My attention was focused almost completely on reaching home. My friend was frightened too. We talked over each other, trying to understand what had happened. Neither of us had a good explanation. We had both seen the light in the sky. We had both watched it appear directly in front of the car. We had both seen it return to the sky almost instantly. There was no disagreement between us about the main event. When we reached the house, we went inside and immediately told everyone what had happened. We were still excited and frightened, probably speaking too quickly and interrupting one another. We explained that a bright light had followed us and then moved down in front of the car before shooting back into the sky. No one believed us. That reaction was not entirely surprising. The story sounded impossible. We had no photograph, video, or physical evidence. This happened long before people carried smartphones capable of recording almost everything. Even if we had owned a camera, there would not have been time to use it. The event happened too quickly, and both of us were more concerned with getting away than collecting proof. To the people in the house, we were two frightened young women arriving late at night with a strange story. Maybe they thought we had seen an airplane. Maybe they believed we were exaggerating. Someone may have suggested we were tired or that our imagination had taken over. I do not remember every response. I only remember the disappointment of realizing that no one truly accepted what we were telling them. It is difficult to describe something impossible when the listener has already decided it did not happen. You start questioning your own words. You wonder whether you are explaining the distance correctly, whether the movement was really as fast as you remember, or whether fear made the light seem closer. But my friend had been there. That kept me from dismissing the experience completely. We had not discussed UFOs or strange lights before it happened. We had not been searching the sky for something unusual. The light appeared during an ordinary drive home. Both of us reacted at the same moment. Both of us screamed. I reversed the car because we believed something was blocking the road. That was not a misunderstanding created years later. The fear was immediate. For the next several days, I replayed the event in my mind. I tried to create ordinary explanations. Perhaps it had been a helicopter. A helicopter can hover, carry a strong light, and move vertically. If it had been flying toward us with a spotlight, maybe the changing angle created the illusion that it suddenly appeared in front of the car. But a helicopter at that distance should have made a great deal of noise. At night in a quiet rural area, the sound would have been impossible to miss. I do not remember hearing rotors. A helicopter also could not move from the road back into the sky as quickly as that light seemed to move. Perhaps it had been an airplane. A plane coming toward you at night can look like a stationary light because the angle does not change much. If it turns, the light can suddenly appear to move. But an airplane would not drop to road level, stop directly in front of us, and then return upward in an instant. There were no visible wing lights. We did not hear an engine passing overhead. The airplane explanation never felt right. Another possibility was that two separate events happened at the same time. Maybe the light in the sky was an aircraft, while the bright flash in front of us came from something on the ground. A transformer could have exploded. Electrical equipment sometimes produces a powerful flash that lights up the surrounding area. If a transformer blew near the road at the exact moment we turned, perhaps we connected that flash to the light above us. I've told myself that many times. It is one of the most reasonable explanations I have found. But a transformer explosion should have produced more than a silent light. There should have been a loud bang, sparks, smoke, damaged power lines, or an electrical outage. I do not remember any of those things. The light did not seem to come from a utility pole beside the road. It appeared in front of us, then returned to the sky. Maybe a car approached from another direction with bright headlights. A rise or curve in the road can make headlights appear suddenly. The driver could have turned away just as quickly, creating the impression that the light vanished. But we were familiar with that road. The light did not look like two headlights. There was no vehicle body, engine noise, or sound of tires. It also did not drive away along the ground. We saw it above us again. For years, I continued searching for explanations. Every possibility worked for one part of the event, but failed to explain another. A plane explained the light in the sky, but not its sudden movement. A helicopter explained its ability to hover, but not its speed or silence. A transformer explained a bright flash near the road, but not the same light reappearing overhead. A car explained something blocking the road, but not the movement into the sky. I began to wonder whether distance and darkness had confused us. Perhaps the light never moved as far as we thought. When we turned onto the road, the change in our position could have made the same distant light appear directly ahead. Then, as I reversed and changed the angle again, it may have seemed to return upward. That kind of visual effect is possible. But the light felt close enough that I believed we were in danger of hitting something. Both of us reacted as if a physical object had entered the road. I honked the horn. I reversed quickly. We were not calmly observing a distant star-changing position because of a turn. We believed something was directly in front of the car. The memory affected me long after that night. I became nervous when driving alone after midnight. Open roads that had once felt peaceful began to feel exposed. I would look into the sky more often, searching for lights that seemed too bright, too low, or too steady. If I noticed one, I watched it carefully until it disappeared or revealed itself as a plane. I still do that now. Most lights have simple explanations. I see airplanes turning toward an airport. I see helicopters, towers, stars, planets, and satellites. Sometimes a distant aircraft appears to remain still until it changes direction, and I understand how easily someone could mistake it for something unusual. But I have never seen another light behave the way that one did. Nothing else has dropped from the sky and appeared directly in front of my car. Nothing else has returned upward so quickly that I could barely follow it. The experience also changed the way I respond to other people's stories. When someone says they saw something strange in the sky, I do not automatically assume they are lying. They may be mistaken. They may have misunderstood an aircraft, a balloon, a drone, or a natural light. But they may also have seen something they genuinely cannot explain. I know how frustrating it is to tell the truth and watch people dismiss it because the event does not fit their understanding of the world. My friend and I did not gain anything from the story. No one paid us. We did not become famous. Most people did not even believe us. Eventually, we stopped bringing it up. I have not talked about it openly for many years. There is always a risk that someone will laugh or immediately search for a way to prove the experience could not have happened. I understand skepticism. Extraordinary claims require strong evidence, and we had none. But a lack of evidence does not mean an experience never happened. Sometimes, something appears without warning and disappears before anyone can document it. All that remains is the memory of the witnesses. It has been around 35 years, and I still remember that drive. I remember the darkness around the road. I remember noticing the bright light above us. I remember saying that it seemed to be following the car. I remember turning onto the road home. Then I remember the light suddenly appearing directly in front of us. The fear from that moment has never completely left me. I can still hear my friends screaming. I can remember hitting the horn and putting the car into reverse. I can remember looking forward and seeing nothing but that bright light. Then it was back in the sky. It happened too quickly for us to understand. Sometimes I wonder whether the light had been watching us. That is not something I can prove, and I usually avoid thinking about it. Still, the way it appeared after we turned onto our road felt deliberate. It had remained at a distance while we drove through town. Then, when we entered the quieter road leading home, it came down. Maybe that was only a coincidence. Maybe the turn changed our perspective and created the entire illusion. But it did not feel accidental. It felt as though something had followed us until we were away from other people and then moved directly into our path. I am grateful that it did not remain there. I do not know what I would have done if it had moved closer or followed the car all the way to the house. I do not know whether there was an object behind the light or whether it was only some kind of strange energy or reflection. I saw no creatures, windows, or clear spacecraft. Calling it a UFO does not necessarily mean I believe it was an alien vehicle. It only means it was an object or light in the sky that I could not identify. After 35 years, it is still unidentified to me. I continue giving myself normal explanations because they make the memory easier to live with. A helicopter, an airplane, a transformer, two unrelated lights seen at the same moment, a trick caused by the road, darkness, and our own fear. Any of those would be better than believing something unknown deliberately came down in front of us. But deep down, I do not believe those explanations. I know how quickly the light moved. I know how close it seemed. I know my friend saw it too. And I know that when I threw the car into reverse, the light left the road and returned to the sky in less time than it takes to blink. That is why I still become nervous when I drive alone late at night. Even after all these years, I watch the sky. Whenever I see a strange light, I wait for it to reveal itself as something ordinary. Most of the time, it does. But part of me is always waiting to see that same light again, following silently above the road until I make the wrong turn.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.